So welcome to all of you. We're really glad you're here. We're not going to do an orientation of the conference right now. We're just going to sort of flow right in. But the very first thing I'd like to do is invite Dean Cheryl Howard to come up to the stage, and she's going to welcome the conference on behalf of CUNY School of Law, which has co-sponsored and contributed a huge amount to the conference. Oh, Philadelphia. I forgot Philadelphia.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Cheryl Howard, and I am the Dean of Student Affairs here at CUNY Law. And I'd like to welcome the Project for Integrating Spirituality, Law, and Politics to the Law School for your 2014 conference. At CUNY Law, contemplative practice has a very long and honored history. Our contemplative practice started right after 9/11 as a way to provide solace and understanding of what had happened in our New York community. Since that time, the contemplative law class taught by Victor Good has been an important and transformative class for many students coming through. I am familiar with Victor's work because he kindly works with the Pipeline to Justice program, which I direct, and has brought a real different perspective to law for the students in that program who are attempting to get into law school. He's worked with them both as groups and individually, and he can be credited with many of these students getting through law school. I have been a mediator for over 25 years. Contemplative practice, the practice of bringing people together through understanding and fairness, the practice of empowering people to resolve their own conflicts is very close to my heart, and is very important to me that the law continue to move in this direction. That being said, I want to tell you that we're proud to host this conference, and we welcome you here and hope that you can continue your work here after the conference is over. Thank you very much.
We'll proceed on to the second portion of our program, which will be a reading of Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham City Jail. Sina and Dave, come to the stage. Thank you.
Just going to say a little something about it.
Sure.
So, am I on? Yes? Okay. Hi, good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm Maria Arias. So I just want to give a few introductory remarks about this letter. On April 16 of 1963, while he was incarcerated, Martin Luther King Jr. wrote this very famous letter called A Letter from Birmingham Jail. It was in response to, he had been incarcerated for his work, which was, he was involved with the Birmingham campaign during that time to end racism and segregation in Birmingham, Alabama. And there were 8 white Alabama clergymen that wrote a document that was called A Call for Unity. And in that, they were disagreeing and writing statements against Martin Luther King's methods. And someone got this to him while he was incarcerated, and this letter was his response. We're reading a few excerpts from it, and I just want to say that Victor and I have used this letter, and we've used a method called Lectura Divina, where we read the document slowly and contemplative, kind of letting its message sink in. And we've done it with our contemplative law class here, and we've done it in other settings. And this evening, we're going to share some excerpts from that. Thank you.
My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom, if ever, do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all the criticisms that crossed my desk, my secretaries would be engaged in little else in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill, and your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I would like to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I think I should give the reason for my being in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the argument of outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every southern state with headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. So I am here, along with several members of my staff, because we were invited here. I am here because I have basic organizational ties here. Beyond this, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the 8th century prophets left their little villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his little village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to practically every hamlet and city of the Greco-Roman world, I too am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my particular hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere in this country. You deplore the demonstrations that are presently taking place in Birmingham. But I am sorry that your statement did not express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations into being. I am sure that each of you would want to go beyond the superficial social analyst who merely looks at effects and does not grapple with underlying causes. I would not hesitate to say that it is unfortunate that so-called demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham at the time, but I would say in more emphatic terms that it is even more unfortunate that the white power structure of this city left the Negro community no other alternative. We have gone through all these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying of the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of police brutality is known in every section of this country. Its unjust treatment of Negroes in the courts is a notorious reality. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than any city in this nation. These are the hard, brutal, and unbelievable facts. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the political leaders consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. Then came the opportunity last September to talk to some of the leaders of the economic community. In the negotiating sessions, certain promises were made by the merchants, such as a promise to remove the humiliating racial signs from the store. On the basis of these promises, the Reverend Shuttlesworth and the leaders of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights agreed to call a moratorium on any type of demonstrations. As the weeks and months unfolded, we realized that we were the victims of a broken promise. The signs remained. As in so many experiences of the past, we were confronted with blasted hopes, and the dark shadow of deep disappointment settled upon us. So we had no alternative except that of preparing for direct action, whereby we would present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and national community. We were not unmindful of the difficulties involved, so we decided to go through a process of self-purification. We started having workshops on nonviolence and repeatedly asked ourselves the questions: are you able to accept blows without retaliating? Are you able to endure the ordeals of jail? Then it occurred to us that the March election was ahead, and so we speedily decided to postpone action until after Election Day. When we discovered that Mr. Connor was in the runoff, we decided again to postpone action so that demonstrations could not be used to cloud the issues. At this time, we agreed to begin our nonviolent witness the day after the runoff. This reveals that we did not move irresponsibly into direct action. We too wanted to see Mr. Connor defeated. So we went through postponement after postponement to aid in this community need. After this, we felt that direct action could be delayed no longer. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, etc.? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are exactly right in your call for negotiation. This is the purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and establish such creative tension that a community that has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue so that it can no longer be ignored. I just referred to the creative tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor. This may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly worked and preached against violent tension. But there is a type of constructive, nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. So the purpose of the direct action is to create a situation so crisis packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. We therefore concur with you in your call for negotiation. Too long has our beloved Southland been bogged down in the tragic attempt to live in monologue rather than dialogue. One of the basic points in your statement is that our acts are untimely. Some have asked, why didn't you give the new administration time to act? The only answer that I can give to this inquiry is that the new administration must be prodded about as much as the outgoing one before its act. We will be sadly mistaken if we feel that the election of Mr. Boutwell will bring the millennium to Birmingham. While Mr. Boutwell is a much more articulate and gentle than Mr. Connor, they are both segregationists, dedicated to the task of maintaining the status quo. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. History is the long and tragic story of the fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture. But as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups are more immoral than individuals. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have never yet engaged in a direct action movement that was well-timed according to the timetable of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word, wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost meant never. It has been a tranquilizing thalidomide, relieving the emotional stress for a moment, only to give birth to an ill-formed infant of frustration. We must come to see with the distinguished jurists of yesterday that justice too long delayed is justice denied.
We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward the goal of political independence, and we still creep at a horse and buggy pace toward the gaining of a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. I guess it's easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, When you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your black brothers and sisters with impunity. When you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smoldering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her little eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see the depressing clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness toward white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking in agonizing pathos, "Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean?" When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you? When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white men and colored, when your first name becomes nigger, your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John, and your wife and mother are never given the respect title of Mrs., when you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it so difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of injustice where they experience the bleakness of corroding despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience.
Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, and pray for them that despitefully use you. In deep disappointment, I have wept over the laxity of the church. But be assured that my tears have been tears of love. There can be no deep disappointment where there is not deep love. Yes, I love the church. I love her sacred walls. How could I do otherwise? Yes, I see the church as the body of Christ, but oh, how we have blemished that body through social neglect and through fear of being nonconformists. There was a time when the church was very powerful. It was during that period when the early Christians rejoiced, when they were deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Things are different now. The contemporary church is so often a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. It is so often the arch supporter of the status quo. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's silent and often vocal sanction of things as they are. But the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If the church of today does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authentic ring, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century. I am meeting with young people every day whose disappointment with the church has risen to outright disgust. I am thankful to God that some noble souls from the ranks of organized religion have broken loose from the paralyzing chains of conformity and joined us as active partners in the struggle for freedom. They have left their secure congregations and walked the streets of Albany, Georgia with us. Yes, they've gone to jail with us. Some have been kicked out of their churches and lost the support of their bishops and fellow ministers. But they have gone with the faith that right defeated is stronger than evil triumphant. I hope the church as a whole will meet the challenge of this decisive hour. But even if the church does not come to the aid of justice, I have no despair about the future. I have no fear about the outcome of our struggle in Birmingham, even if our motives are presently misunderstood. We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation, because the goal of America is freedom. We will win our freedom because the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of God are embodied in our echoing demands. I must close now. But before closing, I'm impelled to mention one more point in your statement that troubled me profoundly. You warmly commend the Birmingham police for keeping order and preventing violence. I doubt that you would have so warmly commended the police force if you had seen its angry, violent dogs literally biting 6 unarmed, nonviolent Negroes. I don't believe that you would so quickly commend the policemen if you would observe their ugly and inhumane treatment of Negroes here in the city jail. If you would watch them push and curse old Negro women and young Negro girls. If you were to see them slap and kick old Negro men and young boys. If you would observe them, as they did on 2 occasions, refuse to give food because we wanted to sing our grace together. I cannot join you in your praise of the Birmingham Police Department. Over the last few years, I have consistently preached that nonviolent demands the means we must use must be pure as the ends we seek. So I've tried to make clear that it is wrong to use immoral means to attain moral ends. But now I must affirm that it is just as wrong, or even more so, to use moral means to preserve immoral ends. Maybe Mr. Connor and his policemen have been rather publicly nonviolent, as Chief Pritchard was in Albany, Georgia. But they have used the moral means of nonviolence to maintain the immoral end of flagrant injustice. I wish you had commended the Negro citizens and demonstrators in Birmingham for their sublime courage, their willingness to suffer, and their amazing discipline in the midst of the most inhumane provocation. One day the South will recognize its real heroes. There will be the James Merediths, courageously and with a majestic sense of purpose, facing jeering and hostile mobs, and the agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of the pioneer. There will be the old, oppressed, battered Negro women, symbolized in a 72-year-old woman in Montgomery, Alabama, who rose up with a sense of dignity, and with her people decided not to ride segregated buses, and responded to one who inquired about her tiredness with the ungrammatical profundity, "My feet is tired, but my soul is rested." There will be young high school and college students, the young ministers of the gospel, and a host of the elders courageously and non-violently sitting in at lunch counters and willingly going to jail for conscience sake. One day the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for the best in the American dream and the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage. And thus carrying our nation back to the great wells of democracy, which were dug deep by the Founding Fathers in the formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Never before have I written a letter this long, or should I say a book. I'm afraid that it is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I'd been writing from a comfortable desk. But what else can one do when you're alone for days in the dull monotony of a narrow jail cell, other than write long letters, think strange thoughts, and pray long prayers? I hope this letter finds you well in faith. I also hope that circumstances will soon make it possible for me to meet each of you, not as an integrationist or a civil rights leader, but as a fellow clergyman and a Christian brother. Let us all hope the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away, and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. and in not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood,